Welcome to the Soul Grit podcast. I'm Ann Taylor McNeese, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I also love Jesus, and I'm passionate about all things gospel and therapy. I created Soul Grit to be at the intersection of mental health and Christian faith. Christ followers need a place to ask questions and get answers about mental health. Join me as we dive into real stories and real questions from people who want to honor God with their hearts, souls, and minds. Hi, welcome back to the Soul Grit podcast. This is Ann, and I'm here with Dr. Mary Lynn. Hi, Mary.
Hi, Ann. Nice to meet you in person finally and have this chat. Although I feel like I know you already because we always have the pre-recording chat and there's a lot of things we actually have in common. So it's nice to be here with you.
Well, I love having these chats because, as I said, the people that come on the podcast, especially the therapists and psychologists, these are my virtual colleagues. And so, even though you are a clinical psychologist out of Toronto area, and I'm a marriage and family therapist out of Southern California, we are now virtual colleagues thanks to Zoom.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. That's what I love about this.
So, glad to have you here because you are an expert in your field and you've written a new book, which we're going to talk a little bit about. And I wanted to just start out with part of your book story is your coming of age, you're dealing with your family of origin, you're being brought up by an immigrant family and finding who you are as an Asian Canadian, as a woman with leadership skills, with education, with a heart for God. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are?
And I would also add I'm of a generation, without giving away my age, which you could probably do the math. I grew up in the late 60s, 70s in Toronto, where basically we were pretty much the only Asian family. And it wasn't something that I was prepared. Like our parents didn't go, okay, learn English because we're going to go to Canada. In fact, I did not learn to speak English until I went to kindergarten, and they just kind of on the fly, I was taught. I don't think I even did any special classes. So it was really definitely quite an adjustment. And for me, my nature is I watch, I observe, I'm sensitive. I hugely want to be liked and accepted by people. So I learned early on how to gain that approval and acceptance. Oh, that thing I said that makes you laugh. Oh, you like funny people. Okay.
I can
So
be
I'm
that.
going to be funny. I can be that. And so one of the things I've recognized is a strength of but is also a possible, well, it is a blind spot, survival mechanism is that I can be like a chameleon in that I can change depending on the situation. And it makes me good at my job because I can connect with pretty much anyone. And I genuinely want to connect with them and hear their story. But sometimes that's kind of like the struggles in who am I really, that led to the writing of this book. And even way before that, the kind of work that I would do with clients where a lot of the same kind of questions would come up where I'd ask them, well, what do you want? I don't know, especially a lot of women, right? They don't know what they want because they're so busy taking care of everybody else. And so people pleasing, perfectionism, performance just became sort of the normative for me. And it was hard to kind of then stop and go, is this really what I want? Is this really who I am? Is this really who God has created me to be? And so this book kind of emerged out of the fires of figuring that out because, as God tends to do, he does allow us to go through hardships that challenges those strategies so that they don't work quite as well anymore. And it was good because that's where I kind of came to terms and started to come. Haven't arrived for sure. And so as I've become more honest with myself and with others about who I am and how I feel and all of that, I find it's made me so much more effective in the work that I do because I get to help others with that same journey of discovery. Hmm.
And even if you weren't a psychologist, I think like becoming more aware of who you are would make you more effective
Mm.
in whatever career path you chose, right?
Yeah, for sure,
Whatever
for
family
sure.
situation you
Yeah.
find
And as
yourself
you know, as a therapist, family of origin's huge.
in. Hmm.
And a lot of things we believe about ourselves, about others, about God gets shaped by a lot of our early experiences. And so we don't always recognize how much of it is um, like a filter
Yeah.
or a bias or belief that we've taken on unless we
Mhm.
really stop and examine that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
So I found that the first part of your book was really, it was about kind of like personality development, right? Like how do you
Hmm.
become the person that you stumbled into adulthood and now you have all these coping
Hmm.
mechanisms that maybe aren't the most helpful, but they helped you survive, and you
Right.
have certain ways that you interact with people or you do your work or you think about God or whatever it might be. Can you
Hmm.
just, teach us, like teach my audience, like how do
Right.
you become a human? How does a human become an adult?
Oh my gosh, that question can take me several hours to
Right.
answer. But like I think God in his wisdom create us with such a capacity for growth.
Mhm.
And it is that leaning into a growth mindset. And that includes even growing and learning about ourselves and growing and learning about all the things that shaped us growing up and not being so like black and white and kind of going, well, that's just the way I am.
Mhm.
So like the science on personality is that there is actually quite a bit of flexibility in how we show up.
Mhm.
um, what I am talking about with sort of coming to figure out who you are, I genuinely believe that when God created us, he had very specific thoughts and ideas about how he wanted us to be. And he knew the environments in which we would grow. He knew the influences that would shape us. And he said, and this is the life that you're going to live. But more than that, like it's this evolution or growth into the best version of ourselves so that we
Mhm.
can reflect his glory. I believe all of us were made to reflect his glory in some way, in a very, very unique way. And that
Mhm.
if all of us are doing our best and knowing who we are and living out of the best version of ourselves, we're reflecting his glory the best. So it's like all together, we can create this symphony of beauty because we're all kind of playing the right note or
Mhm.
shining the right light if it's a string
Mhm.
of lights, for example. So, but before you can kind of, as an adult, because most people at this point of reflection who are going to be listening to this podcast are going like, yeah, but I can't change the past.
Mhm.
And I don't even know if I want to go there. And especially as a Christian, I don't want to dishonor my parents. So the self-reflection is not always easy, but it's being able to kind of think about the experience you've had and you may want to work with a therapist or a coach because sometimes you just don't know what you don't know
Mhm.
and just begin to go, what did I like as a child? What did I do well? What did brought me joy? But to also recognize the painful points as in, oh, when I did that, that was the result. So I learned early on that if I'm bad, quotes, then this bad thing would happen. And so, with all of that shaping us and impacting us, now we can look back and go, okay, so I developed a lot of these strategies because that's how I learned to survive.
Mhm.
Human beings, we all have a need for acceptance, belonging, respect, agency. They're just basic human needs.
Mhm.
And when those needs are threatened or they're not being met as we're growing up, then we'll develop these strategies to try to get those needs met, some
Mhm.
of which may not be so healthy. And so just recognizing that will help us to um, have that. And so the sort of the arc of personal development is initially having the insight.
Mhm.
Why do I do what I do? Really understanding
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
from a human standpoint, but also from a personal standpoint, like my personal history.
Mhm.
And then after that is like, well, how can I do better? Like, how can I take all this insight? Because we are not short of information. And
Right.
one of the challenges I often have when I'm working with leaders is I'll be giving them some feedback on some personality tests they did or something at 360-degree assessment. They'll be like, yeah, I know the stuff.
Mhm.
Well, it's not a lack of knowledge, it's a lack of application. So are you applying this into your life?
Mhm.
And are you also aware as you apply this into your life, how people are receiving it? Because you may have a perspective that you're doing it in this way, but like, what's it like being on the other side of you? And so
Mhm.
the insight of your behaviors, regardless of your motivations, how that affects others, can start to help you shift to really do better. And then even from that standpoint, to truly transform into a mature adult, it takes a lot of practice
Mhm.
and growth. So growth and like it's just jagged, it's not linear, it's going to take your entire lifetime. That's
Mhm.
essentially um growing into adulthood, I guess, in a really quick, maybe not so quick, but nutshell. So,
Well, I remember in one of your chapters, you talked about an experience where you had taken like a an assessment. I think it was about integration or something. And it came back and
yes.
it said you weren't really doing that great on it. And you were like, I know that this test has 95% accuracy, but I'm going to have to call up the maker of the test and tell them they did it wrong because my results are wrong, right? So
Exactly.
tell us about what happened with that situation.
it's about not always practicing what you preach.
Yeah.
And I have self-awareness, but that's different from integration. So integration is like I have my strengths and I use them a lot.
Mhm.
I have good intuition. I have good ability to connect with people, but I don't always use all the different sources of information. So, like, I'm maybe not as logical, analytical, and thinking things through. So, we're like, integration isn't just that I have self awareness. It actually is, am I actively aware of my blind spots? Am I actively working on
Mhm.
responding better so I'm not reactive to the situation using old strategies? Am I
Yeah.
actually seeking feedback? And can I also show compassion towards myself whenever I make mistakes? So I find, you know, I don't know if you find this to be the case, but a lot of people in our field, we don't actually score that well on those kinds of tests because we are highly self-critical. And so
Mhm.
I recognize that underlying part of the reason why I scored so poorly was because I was like, oh yeah, no, I'm terrible at this. Oh yeah, no, this is an issue. And it's because I'm so self-critical because we're our wiring is for insight and we want to grow and we want to help other people grow. So then sometimes we go too far the other way.
Mhm.
And it then becomes anyway, it was a humbling time of recognizing that I don't always practice what I preach, but
Mhm.
also it was a time for me to offer myself self-compassion in that I'm still growing and I
Mhm.
will continue to grow this side of heaven.
And now
And
you have more information about what area you can grow in,
that's right.
some
That's right.
direction for it. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, but I think that's the key thing is like we're not meant to try to become perfect because it's not possible.
Mhm.
So integration is a better term because it is self-awareness, it's being flexible to how you respond to given
Mhm.
situations, it's
Mhm.
humility, it's being able to also hold the mystery of God and life. And we don't have to squeeze him into a box. We don't
Mhm.
have to say, I have to know the answer to this because frankly, he's a mystery in so many
Mhm.
ways. So it's
Mhm.
just that okay, I'm gonna do life and I'm gonna try to grow, but I'm gonna get it wrong. And in the getting it wrong, I'm gonna learn more about myself, about others, and about God.
Mhm.
And so there's just this flow, a much more of a flow. It's not so forced. We're not so focused on what people think about us. I mean,
Mhm.
fear and shame are the two biggest issues that cause so much heartache and troubles in people's lives. Well, if you're not aware of what you're afraid of, or you deny that you have fear, or
Mhm.
you're not aware of what causes you shame and you deny you have shame, well, I can guarantee you it's controlling you, right?
Mhm.
Because we are emotional beings 100% of the time. We're always feeling the feels. And so not knowing how we feel can then affect the way that we are handling a situation, but we'll just rationalize it. Well, it's just
Mhm.
because. and that's we'll say this, but it's actually because we were really hurt or upset, and we're not acknowledging that.
Well,
Yeah.
how can somebody get more in touch with what their fears are, or where their shame is coming from? How would you
Yeah.
coach?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if it's something that's brand new to you, it's you almost want to go to like getting a feelings wheel off the internet and get one that's like a child's like, because the
With the
feeling
little
wheels
faces on
with the
it?
little faces, yeah, they're super complex, and they're like, oh
Yeah.
my gosh, I have to decide between this one and that one. It's just and
Yes.
it really isn't that big of a deal. It's just that you're paying attention. The other thing I encourage people to do is just kind of do a daily examine. And I know we talk about that in the spiritual realm as an examine, in, where have I struggled spiritually? Where do I need God? I'm thinking of this more as a psychological, emotional examine. So with that, you think about the day and just pinpoint the high points and the low points and certain times where you might have felt, and the word I would say is just icky. Like maybe you didn't feel so great. Then narrow in on what was going on at that time, and then begin to ask yourself, what could that be? And if you still struggle with that, you definitely would benefit from working with somebody who can help give you some language around it. But I'm working with a client right now, male, who has been numb for years of his life, but he's now starting to identify how he feels. And it becomes overwhelming at first because it just feels like so much. And he's constantly trying to rationalize it and trying to put it into boxes, and emotions aren't like that. But he's becoming more and more tolerant of his emotions, and recognizing that they do give him insight, and he needs to pay attention to them, and it tells him what his soul needs too, right?
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
This whole thing with like integration of, your self-awareness, and then like,
Mm.
what do you do with it? Like, how do you grow? How do you apply this knowledge? It really reminds me of that verse in James where the writer says, if you read the word but don't do what it says, it's like
Yes.
looking in the mirror and walking away and
Yes.
forgetting what you look like.
Hmm.
It's like we could have all this knowledge. You might go to therapy, you might read books, but if you don't actually learn how to apply it and start changing and transforming some things in your life,
Yeah.
then like you forgot what you look like in the mirror.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
It's
so
so
this
true.
is just one of those other areas where I'm like, oh yes, the field of psychology has caught up to what the Bible was saying all along.
Hmm.
And just giving us like different language that we can understand it, maybe a little bit more scientifically or clinically about like what that means, but it's still
Hmm.
the principle that the
Yes.
Bible was telling us all along,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. And that's exactly it. It's being able to have that self-awareness. But also, uh, when I mentioned that all humans need affirmation, acceptance, belonging,
Mhm.
um, respect, agency, and all that, the really key thing to keep in mind is that we need relationships for that.
Mhm.
And so, really, true growth includes developing safe relationships where you feel like you can let down your guard, be vulnerable with others, where you can ask them for honest feedback so
Mhm.
that they can help you grow, where you can grow together. Those are the best kinds of relationships,
Yeah.
not the ones where you feel so cozy that nobody ever challenges each other, or that it's so superficial you never have deep conversations, right? And
Mhm.
so, like personal growth, if you're going to kind of go, okay, I'm going to personally grow, leave me alone for 2 years, and I'm going to come back a better version of me.
No.
It's not that simple because it requires others.
Right.
And often, and that's why, churches can be so challenging yet so necessary, is that we rub each other the wrong way all the time. We have conflicts, we disagree with each other, but it's in those kinds of experiences that we learn so much about ourselves,
Mhm.
which we can then go, okay, well, that wasn't a good response on my part. I can do better.
Mhm.
And so that's that growth mindset. And and being able to then do it enough times, because science shows us that our brain has such a capacity to be rewired.
Yeah.
So the more we repeat certain thoughts or actions, it becomes new pathways in our
Right.
brain. So we have to do that enough so that it becomes habitual. We can't just do the change behavior once and kind of go, ta, check off my list, did
Fix
it,
that.
fixed it. I wish it was so easy. And that's why growth is a lifelong journey, and it's many layers. And there's, you think you figured one thing out, and then it goes into some more subtle areas of where you struggle with that. So that thing I mentioned about people pleasing, I'm pretty good now at being more assertive and speaking my mind, and I'm pretty good at handling conflict and all that, but it goes into really hidden places in some, especially relationships with people in positions of authority because of my history. If somebody is of a particular personality and I feel more intimidated, there's all sorts of things. If I feel like lack of confidence, or I'm kind of struggling with imposter syndromes, and I'm going to probably go down, I will go down that road more often than not. So it's still there, but it's just more subtle. And sometimes, so I can't just go check, I'm all fixed in this area. I am so free from this.
Mhm.
I am freer, and I'm growing to be freer and freer. And I think that's that mentality that your listeners and viewers need to take, is that personal growth is lifelong, transformation is lifelong,
Yeah.
and it's good. And it's good.
Right, right. And in a spiritual sense, we know that immediately when you come to faith in Christ, you are justified,
Mm-hmm.
and then you begin to be sanctified. And so
Mm-hmm.
I would say at this point in your life or my life, we could say, I am sanctified, but I continue to be sanctified until,
Yeah.
I'm glorified. But that's the same, like we have a spiritual word for that. I think if you're like church people, you'll know, like, okay, it's a continual process. In fact, I
Yeah.
had this discussion with my 9-year-old recently because he doesn't want to go to Sunday school because
Mm-hmm.
he's already heard all the stories. He's read everything in the Action Bible, and he doesn't
Mm-hmm.
know what he's going to learn.
Right.
And I said to him, well, buddy, you're going to be reading that same Bible your entire life.
Yes.
And that same Bible is going to continue to shape you and grow you throughout
Mm-hmm.
your lifespan.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I know all the stories that are in the Bible, I still read it every day because the Holy Spirit is working in me to grow me differently, show me different things,
Right.
like cut into those places that I need that refinement. So
Mm-hmm.
explain that to a 9-year-old.
I
Like,
know,
you
exactly.
gotta hang in
You
there.
want me to go somewhere boring and do something boring that I've done before? Oh my gosh.
And so but it's that it works either in our professional or our psychological or our spiritual growth. Like as a therapist, I could say, well, I've read all of the books and I trained and I
That's
did all
right.
my internship hours and I know everything
Yeah.
there is to know currently about psychology. I'm not saying I do, but like
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of stuff, but like you
Mm-hmm.
said, there's never going to be a point where I'm like, I have arrived and I've fixed the
Yes.
thing. It's
Yeah.
always going to be a growth. Now, you said a couple of times in the book, you really want somebody to have a couple of close friends where they can confess things, they can ask for feedback, they can have accountability, they can process how they're growing. But you also said those people can't do what a therapist does.
Yeah. It's
Your
so true.
spouse can't be your therapist, your sister
Mm-hmm.
can't be your
Mm-hmm.
therapist, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so for some of these things, we do need, like, I always see this as checking myself in and out of therapy throughout my adult life, where
Mm-hmm.
it's like sometimes you need to go and just like crack that surface, dig a little deeper, figure
Yeah.
something out. And then you get to a point where you're like, okay, I think my friends and family can support me on this next leg of the
Mm-hmm.
journey.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
you don't stay
And
in therapy.
having wise family and friends who kind of go, maybe it's time for you to see a therapist.
Yeah.
And for me, especially because I am not going to be my family's therapist, no matter what, that I'm in the field. I might have some words of wisdom to give you if you want to listen, which a lot of times you don't necessarily want to, because I'm just mom, or I'm just wife, or I'm just friend. But it's being able to have friends who kind of go, you know what, I can hear that there's some really significant struggles that you're going through, it would maybe make sense for you to see a professional for that. So the process that I'm recommending through the book is meant to be sort of like a personal growth study that ideally you do with other people so that there's accountability, but you are literally practicing the skills I'm talking about in that. For example, practicing the art of being vulnerable, of facing shame down, all of those things, of learning to be vulnerable in our need for relationships. So those are the reasons why. But even in that, if you kind of hit against a wall, or you recognize there's some unresolved trauma in your life, or you're really gripped by anxiety to a degree that you can't overcome it just by reading scripture, then I think professional help is very, very important. And then it's kind of like you work alongside. And also, by the way, people might not have those friends yet, because there could be such broken trust in their own lives because of being hurt so many times because of trauma, that they don't know how to find those trusted people, those safe people. So you start off by doing it with a therapist or a coach, that it is their job to be safe for you. And so as you learn to experience safety, you begin to internalize it. And that's what we do as parents, by the way, with our kids. When we're safe for them, they internalize it, and it allows them to explore the world. Well, if you're an adult and you haven't had those experiences growing up, and you experience it with a therapist, you can then internalize those feelings of safety, of being seen and cared for, and you can then take it out into the real world and recognize the kinds of people who are capable of doing that. You now have the skills to speak up, set boundaries, to have honest conversations, so that those relationships are even more likely to be successful and be those safe places for you. And so it can take time. And so it's not a quick fix at all. I've had friends go, "Oh, I'm going to take it to, I want to go to the beach house." And I'm like, well, it might not be the best kind of book to read on the beach. Not that it won't be interesting, but like, if you're going to actually do the work of it, it might take you some time, and it might take you several goes at it. And it's totally okay. It's written in a way that if you really struggle with shame, or you really struggle with imposter syndrome, you can go back to those chapters and reread it over and over again and do those exercises, right? So,
I think my approach to a book like this is to read it all cover to cover as quickly as I can. And then at another point, now that I know what I'm getting into, I'll pick which kind of people I want to read it with.
Yes.
And then I'll go back and get a journal out and go through the questions and all of that. So it was very deep. And I said this to you before we started recording, but I really think that, I mean, you were a therapist before you were an author, right? And you know how to ask good questions, and you know how to take somebody to a deeper level. And I think that the digging deeper section at the end of each of your chapters, you had some chapters just 2 or 3 questions, and some chapters like very detailed exercises for people to do. That is the highlight of the book. And so I'm not saying this would replace therapy for someone, but if you really want to dig deep, you can get good information about psychology or counseling or whatever in lots of books. But I think this book shines in its ability to give you the kinds of questions that, if you really face them honestly, you will grow.
Appreciate you saying that. I wanted it to be something that was insightful, but practical, like actionable, so that people can start this journey and can use the tools that they're being taught so that they can do it. And also, I wanted people to know that I'm on that journey as well. So I don't have it all together, and I still struggle. And so it's not about perfection, as I said already. It's about just the growth. The other thing I also have learned as I've been growing through this journey is just having so much more grace towards myself. And when you look at Jesus and his life that he lived, and just how much compassion he had for others, and even for himself, the self-care that he did, the fact that he was so vulnerable, the fact that he showed his emotions so openly. It's like he kind of showed us that life, yes, will be hard, but in it, you're human. And in your humanity, you will have joy and you will have suffering. And in all of that, we can do this together.
Mhm.
And that's going to be part of how you're going to find joy and community and love and belonging and all those great gifts that we get
Yeah.
in walking with Jesus.
Mhm. I
Hmm.
have to say, I think you and I are probably similar in the way that we operate with clients is that it's
Hmm.
very relational. Um,
Yeah.
I tell people that right up front. Like I have a relational way of practicing. It's
Hmm.
not so much about what I know or what interventions I'm going to use
Hmm.
or any of the techniques. It's really, I believe that people grow and heal in relationship.
Yeah,
So
I
I'm going
agree.
to form that relationship with you.
Hmm.
And then out of that is where you're going to see the transformation. And then you'll take that into other avenues of your life. You know?
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. And it's a safe place because there's consistency. They know they have their appointment with you, and so they get to feel what it's like to trust somebody again after
Mhm.
all of that has happened in their life. When I am training new therapists, they always come going, "Oh, I don't feel like I said the right things. I don't feel like they paid me money, but I didn't give them enough information or
Yeah.
tools."
Yeah.
And I would always say, the biggest gift that you give to your clients is your presence. And you are very, very good at doing that with your clients,
Mm.
empathy and your understanding and your curiosity about their story. And they're like, "Oh, okay, yes." And it's not to minimize that. Yes, you should know what you're talking about in terms of red flags and things to watch out for. Like, definitely, if you're going to see a therapist, get somebody who's registered, qualified, and all that stuff. That's
Yeah.
very important. But yeah, that is the biggest gift, is the relationship for sure. Hmm.
And that's why it is so damaging if a therapist is not, um, doesn't honor like the consistency of like responding to communication or keeping appointments, being on
Hmm.
time for appointments, you know, like
Hmm.
I there was recently a post in a local Facebook group that I'm a part of for other therapists where
Hmm.
somebody was saying, guys, I've had people come into my practice saying that other therapists were bailing on them. I know it's summer, but like, don't reschedule your clients and don't
Hmm.
like, obviously, there's emergencies and we're people too. But being able to hold, like you said, hold that time in your calendar for somebody
Hmm.
else where they get your undivided attention, like,
Hmm.
it's really important that we are very like faithful and professional in that
I
because
agree.
we are trying to build that like there's somebody in the world you can trust. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. And then they themselves learn to not be so chaotic sometimes, because sometimes people in trauma can have a lot of internal chaos. So experiencing consistency
Mhm.
and clarity and structure in their sessions with their therapist is also something they can internalize for themselves. So it becomes less chaotic inside, and they are able to be more resilient to handle the ups and downs of life without swinging this way, swinging that way, because things are happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
And I will say that I do almost everybody that comes to see me needs somebody in their life that they don't have. You know, like they
Hmm.
don't have the family or friendships that they can just be totally honest with and have accountability, have some challenge, but also have like the consistency and faithfulness. I don't It seems like maybe it's just our cultural moment or something, but people don't have that. And so that is one of the hardest things in therapy to be like, okay, we've made progress on all these other things, but you need people in your life for when you're
Hmm.
done paying me for your hour session, like
Hmm.
who's going to be there for you to connect with? And
Hmm.
that's challenging, I think, in our culture. Maybe.
Yeah, I was talking to a young woman in her 20s, and she says her best friend is in her 60s.
Oh.
And the reason being that that was what she was longing for, was not a mother figure, because they were equal, but just somebody who was of a generation where you weren't distracted by social media or how many followers you have or all of that kind of stuff, but they actually would old-fashionedly get together in person, have
Mhm.
some tea, and have some really great conversation. And
Mhm.
I think that um, this is something that a lot of the younger generation longs for, but
Mhm.
maybe doesn't necessarily know how to do that, and it might not have been modeled for them.
Mhm.
Um, I think the ability to handle conflict and repair is huge,
Mhm.
because every relationship always starts off like on a honeymoon where you like each other and everything's good, everyone's on good behavior, and then things start to fall, cracks start to happen. And it's the ability to hang in there,
Yeah.
work through the conflict, and repair the relationship. And
Mhm.
repair includes not just being honest with you about how you might have hurt me, but also taking responsibility for my part of the breakdown. And
Mhm.
when that happens, and it happens repeatedly, safety grows in those relationships. So those are really needed, important skills.
Mhm.
Um, and so that's something that I do talk about self-mastery in the book,
Mhm.
because if you're not doing that for yourself, then it's then hard to expect that in your relationships.
Mhm.
Yeah. Hmm.
I would say that's probably one of the top skills that I teach to my couples that come in. Is
Hmm.
that, like, hey, everybody's gonna have conflict. Everybody's going to annoy each other. Everybody's gonna hurt each other. That's just
Yeah.
what it's like being in a relationship with another human. But
Hmm.
people who are successful, and this kind of draws on the Gottman theory, but people who are successful at being in the relationship long term are
Hmm.
those who know how to repair. And
That's right.
so you need to be able to recognize when the other person is making an attempt to repair, and you
Hmm.
need to be able to do that yourself, and then you need to be able to respond to the other person's attempts.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of it, again, goes back to that self awareness, because if I don't know how I'm feeling,
Mhm.
or I don't know how my behaviors are affecting my partner or friend, if I'm not tracking with that, then how do you make changes? And how do you even receive that feedback if you've never seen yourself as somebody who can be critical for whatever reason, and your partner's trying to tell you that every time you say A, B, and C, they feel criticized, and it's like a huge shock, and it becomes very difficult. So, like,
Mhm.
the thing with doing the work on yourself is that not only are you helping yourself, but you are tremendously helping your relationships for sure. And if you're a parent, it helps you as a parent as well. If you're a leader, oh my gosh, leaders with all the influence they have, you're helping your team also.
Mhm.
And so it's not just, yeah, I'll put this on the side if I have time to do. I mean, it's so core
Mhm.
to really living our best lives, to
Yeah.
living a fully lived life if
Yeah.
we are doing this work on ourselves,
Mhm.
which, like I said, then translates across through relationships and
Mhm.
community and maybe even world impact.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it seems to me like that needs to happen at several times over your adult life, right? Like when
Yes.
you're like in college and you've left home, or you're a young adult, like everything is opened up to you, right? And you really got to figure out who you are. But then things change when you start your career, or you get married, or you have children, or like as you grow through life, you kind of become a different person in a way. Like your personality might still be there, but there's always a chance to like revisit in a new phase. Like what's
Hmm.
important to me? Who am I? What kind of habits have I picked up in the last 10 years that got me
Hmm.
through? Like I said, my kids are, moving end of elementary school up through high school. And so I'm like, what was I doing as a young mom that was sleep deprived and changing diapers?
Yes.
That
Yes.
kind of, like maybe gave me a sharp edge on this side or that side, that
Mhm.
I can now um, focus in a different way. So I think it's
Mhm.
important to maybe not just go through this process one time and think I've grown and I've figured out who I am, but to
Mhm.
revisit it over the course of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. The good news is we do tend to have themes in our life. So although your insight or self-awareness gets deeper and deeper, often they still resonate around the same types of themes, and it just comes out in different ways. So like at whatever stage of life you're at, like it's not wasted the work that you're doing, but yes, keep at it. Like I do an annual 3-day retreat, and part of it is evaluating the year. Part of it is talking to the Lord on what his observations were, and then just asking for some insight and praying into the next year. And a lot of it is, where do I need to grow? What do I need to change? Like what's happening that I need to address?
Yeah.
What are the pain points in my life?
Mhm.
And often that's a good indication of things that needs addressing.
Mhm.
Um, but I think although we evolve, we still are our essential self. So y- I think part of teen years, we do try on different hats and we do try this and that. And we kind of learn strategies or behaviors that work. And certainly in this situation, I'm going to be more this way. In that situation, I'm going to be more that way. And that's okay. It's not that you're going to be unidimensional, because human beings are so complex, but it's that there's this certainty or groundedness in who you are, that you are beloved, that you are created intentionally. And then as you discover more and more of that essential self
Mhm.
and the motives of why you do what you do, then you're more likely to fulfill God's purposes for your life.
Mhm.
And then recognizing that those same gifts that you have can also come out, what I call the shadow self, because it comes out for personal motivation. So I'll give you an example. As a people pleaser, I tend to have anxieties if there's any possible tensions happening in my relationship. So I remember one day a friend hadn't texted me in quite some time, and it's not that usual for that to happen. And I was starting to go, I think she's mad at me. I think she's mad at me. So I did what I call a compulsive self-soothing behavior. And I reached out to her and I said, hey, the Lord just brought you to mind. What can I pray for you about?
Way to
Because
be like super spiritual in how
I
you
know, right?
manage that
I know.
anxiety.
And then she was like, oh, thanks for thinking about me. Yeah, I've been really busy. Love prayer and this and this and that. And I was instantly relaxed.
Yeah.
And I could have just kept on going out and thinking to myself, oh, I am just the most spiritual, such a good,
Mhm.
loving friend. And it's not that I'm not loving, it is one of my gifts. I do love people deeply. It's the fact that really what I was trying to address was my anxiety. So just
Very.
even that knowledge is helpful to then make me aware that my shadow self had really shown up and done that. Now, I like to use the word shadow self versus false self, because I don't think, like, false self makes me think fake, kick to the curb, don't even pay attention. Like, our shadow self came into being to protect us. Like when we were going through tough stuff in life and we were afraid or we felt ashamed or we were insecure, shadow self came to pretend for us, to handle situations for us. So when you get triggered and shadow self comes out, it's not go, oh my gosh, get out of here. You're too, it's like, have compassion. Like, why did she show up? What is hurting? What are you afraid of? What insecurities are getting triggered? And once you have that compassion, you can then choose better. I'm not going to let my emotions rule,
Mhm.
but I'm going to be empathetic to the fact that I was in pain or I was feeling upset. And I don't have to act out on it. But that insight helps to calm me, soothe me, and remind me of who I really am and what it is that I want to do moving forward as a growth opportunity. Right. So I think that's really important, to keep that in mind too, is just questioning, why do I do what I do? What's my motivation in this? And, we're going to always have mixed motives because we're human, and that's okay. But being able to go, yeah, I do really care for that friend, and I actually was worried about her, so I did accomplish that, and she did feel cared for, but, like, ultimately, it was also about my need for reassurance. And so I, since then, had a conversation with her about that, and we had a good laugh over it, because she said, "Oh, I'm gonna call you on that next time you do it."
Yeah, that's my question. So after you had this reflection and you were like, "Oh, I was really just trying to meet my needs, even though
Mhm,
it was a nice thing to do for her." Like, what would you do differently if you had
mhm.
realized that the first time?
That's right. I would have said to her, Hey, I haven't heard from you in a while. Um, I know the last time we talked, we kind of left things in a little bit of a, you know, conflict situation. So, just wanted to check in with how you're doing. And I'll be honest with you, I'm feeling a little anxious.
Mm.
And so I would just be honest with how I'm feeling, but not in a sort of manipulative way,
Yeah.
because, but more in a, hey, this is how I'm feeling. Just want to check in with you. And like if I did that and she would say, oh my gosh, no, I'm just so busy. I haven't had a chance to reply. So in fact, that happened recently because I had a little situation happen with a good friend and, I had sent her a text to just kind of try to resolve it. And I had said to her, knowing she was busy, don't worry about replying right away because I know you're really busy. So she took me at her word and she took her time. So, of course, the whole entire time I'm feeling anxious, going, what's going on? So then I go, oh, no, how about we set a time to meet? Our next time we're going to get together is this time and we can talk about it then. And then she was like, sorry. I've been so busy. I'm not ignoring you. Da, 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 da. So it was an honest,
Yeah.
vulnerable thing for me to do. And it built further trust in our relationship. And that was really important.
Yeah.
So,
I think
mhm,
there's that line there because I was thinking, if I told, like, I've had that situation before too, where you don't hear from somebody for a while and then you go to are they mad at me?
mhm, mhm,
And I've thought, like, well, if I tell them I'm feeling insecure or I'm feeling anxious, I don't want them to be like, oh, I better take care of her. Like,
mhm.
I'm not asking you to care for my emotions per se, but I am trying to be honest with how I'm approaching the situation. Like it's murky to me. Yeah.
It's murky, especially, and it depends on the relationship. So if I'm in a relationship with somebody who we know struggles, like, because we've talked about it, struggles with sometimes being overly dependent.
Mm.
So I have another friend that's the case, and that friend will say, "It's not your problem. It's not your problem. You don't have to fix it, but I just need to let you know how I'm feeling." And so
Okay.
we've set up that sort of clear boundary,
Yeah.
and then I can still own being insensitive to that person's needs, and I can still say, "Hey, I could do better in this because
Mm.
you are sensitive in this area because it's an area of pain and injury for you."
Mm.
So if my friend says to me, whenever you wear a green sweater, I am about ready to just kind of get triggered and go off into a corner. I'm not going to wear a green sweater. I'm going to try to remember not to.
Mhm.
So there is that sensitivity without crossing over into over functioning, overdoing for the other person.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Well, okay. So you just mentioned that one of these keywords, over functioning. And
Yes.
I had already had this realization a little while back that I over function for my kids, for my spouse, mostly just them.
Yeah. Yep.
But it's
Yep.
a tendency. So
Hmm.
talk to us real quick about that difference between high functioning, because I've always been a very high functioning person,
Hmm.
but getting into this season of my life where there's these four other people that are dependent on me has
Hmm.
led me into an over functioning capacity, especially since in my family I have a husband with a TBI and two kids that are neurodivergent. And then the
Mm.
other one's just the
Yeah.
baby of the family. So like
Yeah.
I speak for them when they don't know what
Hmm.
to say, or I make all their food for them. Like I do some
Hmm.
things that probably they could learn to do on their own. You
Yeah.
know?
Yes, yes, yes. I think the difference between the simplest definition of the difference between high functioning and over functioning is that over functioning, the underlying reasons for it is actually anxiety.
Mm.
So we're afraid that if we don't, it won't. Or if we don't step in, some disaster is going to happen. Or if we don't help our kid, then they're not going to succeed. Or if we don't finish that project for our coworker, somehow it's not going to get done in time and it's not going to be to the standards. And so we begin to take on almost the emotional responsibility to make sure that everybody's okay, everybody's happy, everything gets done.
Mhm.
So that just in saying that, it's so obvious that we aren't responsible for it, but we live as if it is.
Mhm.
And when that's the case, you end up not just, because me over functioning is also a compulsive self-soothing thing, because if I do it, then my anxiety decreases and the thing gets done.
Mhm.
But if I also recognize that if I'm over functioning, that means the other person is absolutely under functioning, which means that you're interfering with the growth of your kids or your partner or your coworker. And that's not good for anybody, let alone your own mental health, because that's just the way to burnout is
Yeah.
if you're doing it all. And so that's one of the things that, and I think the world affirms success and productivity far too much.
Mhm.
Um, Competitiveness and winning is also really affirmed a lot. I mean, just watch the Olympics, and I'm not saying that those things are wrong, but it just has taught a culture to believe that they must always be at 150%.
Mhm.
And that's sort of the norm. And we're not created to live that way. And we're not production machines. We're not the ones who are just supposed to spit out things, because you know this. You start to lose your humanity because you're so busy getting tasks done. You forget why you're doing it. You lose connections with the people you love, and you don't really get to know their souls in
Mhm.
a really deep way. So both my kids are young adults, 25 and 27. And so you'll have fun when you get to that stage, because as a therapist, it's even worse, because you know all the things you're not supposed to do and you find yourself doing it. And then you go, oh, what the heck am I doing? And I don't know how many times I've asked my kids, how have I damaged you? How have I damaged you? They're like, Mom, stop it already. You
Right.
did great. It is that recognizing how much I did overfunction. And as I've stepped back more and more and more and more,
Mhm.
even though I don't overfunction physically for them, because they don't live with me anymore and
Mhm.
they're obviously self-sufficient, I will still overfunction emotionally, as in I will carry the weight of the things that are stressing them out. And
Mhm.
that's not helpful, because
Mhm.
that's their journey. And I have to trust their judgment, because if I'm over functioning, worrying about their stuff, you betcha I'm interfering and giving them advice, which is not necessarily helpful for a relationship with young adults, right?
Yeah,
Hmm.
I see
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Hmm.
Recognize some of those patterns in our family. Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
So I guess I like I said, I'm sending my daughter off to high school next week, be a
Ooh.
freshman. And so I'm thinking like there are some things that now that she's in high school, if she can wear makeup, she can do these other things, right?
Yes.
Like today it was like she said, I'm going to order my Starbucks for myself. And then we got up to the Starbucks the head of the line, and then she's like, I'm gonna do it. And the barista kind of smiled at her because she knew like
Yeah.
she was trying to do something that made her be brave, you know? And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
she said what she wanted, but the barista didn't understand. And so I had to step in. I was like, you know what? I should have just pulled back and let her clarify for herself. And,
Yeah. We
but
can't help ourselves. It's
I'm
so
just not
hard.
used to doing it,
I know. I read some recent science that we actually carry some of our kids' genes in us because of the umbilical cord. I mean, if
Huh.
we give birth to them. So we literally have this connection to them that makes it hard for us to distance ourselves from their
Mhm.
life and experiences and their emotions as well. This is what I tell my kids when I interfere too much. I'm like, hey, I got part of your umbilical cord in me still.
That must
We
be
are
it.
attached for life.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And better to have it that way than to be disconnected from your child. But
that
yeah,
is
there are
true.
some
That is true.
challenges. Yeah.
Yes, that is for sure. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Mary, we've been talking this whole time. I don't know if we've actually said the name of the book. So would you tell us the name of your book so people can find that?
Yes, it's called Rebecoming. And it's called Rebecoming because it's about unbecoming all the things that you thought you had to be loved, to
Mhm.
re-become your true God-given essential self. And the tagline is come out of hiding to live as your true or your God-given essential self. And so it is about all the things that we've talked about, personal growth in a hopefully a good combination of faith and science and psychology,
Mhm.
because good science is biblical, as we've talked about, and being able to kind of um, learn strategies to help you grow and to identify areas that you need to grow in. So that's the theme of the book. That's my hope, that people will find it also inspiring, Not just, oh my gosh, this is so hard and I got so much to do. And it's like, please be patient with yourself, be gracious. As I said, the journey is lifelong, and hopefully it'll be just one of those resources that will help you along the way of your personal growth.
Mhm. And
Hmm.
I also wanted to mention that it is like you are a Jesus follower. You have served as a pastor,
Hmm.
you know the Bible, but the book isn't like in your face Christianese and you kind of like there's not like a
Yeah.
Bible verse on every page or anything like that.
Hmm.
So if
Hmm.
you have somebody that you know that is just maybe open to spirituality, but not necessarily a Christ follower, like this is still a book for them.
Yeah, I did that intentionally. My first book is like there's a scripture on every page and
Yeah.
lots of references to my conversations with the Lord and all that.
Yeah.
And this one, I wanted to be accessible to everyone.
Mhm.
And I hope I presented Jesus in the way that I experience him, as loving, as the one who ultimately you belong to and who thinks you're wonderful and wonderfully made
Mhm.
and is so forgiving of your mistakes and is with you as you grow through painful experiences in life. I
Mhm.
hope that's who I presented to people, so that even if people don't know Jesus, don't even want to know Jesus,
Mhm.
can still kind of go, but that
There's
Jesus guy,
value. Yeah.
he's maybe okay, and in that, and I do say also, like, we're all at different points in our spiritual journey, and I meet many people who will say, I'm spiritual, but I don't follow any religion.
Mhm.
And although I'm a Christ follower, I don't consider myself religious.
Mhm.
It's very much about my relationship with the Lord, and I hope that presentation of my relationship with the Lord is encouraging and inspiring, rather than going, oh my gosh, you messed up. You broke one of the cardinal sins,
Mhm. Mhm.
go thee to hell. And that's not at all the message of this book. So, yeah.
Well, I think that you build credibility as a psychologist in the beginning of the book so that if somebody is skeptical of religion or of Jesus or Christianity, they can be like, okay, well, I don't know if she's right about that stuff, but at least I know she knows her psychology, and I can
Hmm.
trust
Hmm.
that. And then later in the book, you go a little bit more in depth into spirituality. And so maybe they're ready by that
Hmm.
point, to
Hmm.
hear that.
Hmm. Yeah.
Whereas if somebody's coming from like, I don't know about psychology, like they
Right.
need to know that there's Jesus in the pages of this.
Hmm. Hmm. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do hope that it does inspire people, and that it helps them in this journey, whether they know Jesus or not. I hope that it does bring them closer to Jesus, who ultimately is the one who centers us and grounds us and loves us, believes in us, and gives us the strength and the ability to kind of do the hard work of personal growth
Mhm.
day in and day out.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, where can people find the book? Where can they find more of your work? How do you connect
Hmm.
with people?
Yep. My book is on all the Amazon, Indigo, Barnes and Noble, etc. The publisher is Baker. So if you go on their website, they're offering 30% off discount.
Nice.
And but for myself personally, I have a website, drmary.com, and that's spelt Merry. So it's like Dr. Mary Christmas, but not Christmas.
Okay.
And yeah, and you can find me on Instagram under Dr. Mary Lynn, which is spelled Merrylin. I guess you probably have it in your show notes. And yeah, any of those methods, you'll be able to connect with me for sure. Yeah.
Well, I'll put those in the show notes so people can easily click through to find you and to order the book
Yes.
from Baker. That sounds great. Um, Before you go, can you tell us what
Hmm.
are you doing for soul care?
Well, I'm very fortunate. I actually live right by the lake, and I love to sit by the lake. I love to float in the lake, and I love to kayak in the lake, and I also do dragon boating. So I do a lot of that type of.
What is dragon boating? I don't know what
Oh
that.
my gosh, you must look into it. There's
Okay.
20 people in a boat, and we're all paddling.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So water to me is very calming. So I do that for soul care. I love to journal and ponder. And I've given myself permission to not it has to be this way or that way. It's more I wake up in the morning, can I go, how do I feel is my time of self-care or soul care? And sometimes it's reading a book, and sometimes it's reading the Bible, and sometimes it's going for a walk, sometimes it's exercising. But I do definitely find that nature is a big one for me. Silence and solitude. I'm surrounded by people all the time. So just being alone to hear my own thoughts is also something that I find really helpful. I find I can hear from the Lord more easily when I'm kind of just spending that time in silence and solitude. So that would be, oh, and I love travel. And it's amazing how you can meet God in the most unusual places. So that would be mine.
Great. Thanks for sharing that with us.
Yeah, you're very welcome. It's been great being on your show.
Yeah.
I like talking to you as a fellow therapist. I feel
know,
like
it's fun, huh?
yeah, it's been great. It's been great to kind of go back and forth and just know that you understand what I'm talking about. And I hope that we've made it understandable for your listeners and viewers as well, that what we're talking about is not just, technical language, but like life applicable insight.
It's a great honor to do this kind of job, to help people with this kind of growth and just be at that most vulnerable, essential part of them, and to see it grow, and then to be happy for them.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that is like you get the front row seat to seeing the best.
Yeah,
when people do that.
and to be fair, we do see the worst of humanity as well. We hear about that, but to see somebody grow is an honor that I just thank God for that. I got to be called into this profession, and so thank you for being my virtual colleague today.
Yes, it was great.
That when you travel to California, you will send me a line and we can meet up.
Yeah, that sounds like a plan. That's the funny thing is how close my sister lives to you. So we'll make it happen.
We'll make it happen. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Dr. Mary.
All right. Thanks, Anne.
The Soul Grit podcast is a production of Soul Grit Resources. You can find more at soulgritresources.com or on the socials at Soul Grit Resources. You can email me at info@soulgritresources.com.